welcome to Microfiche Microphone. I'm Micah, and on this channel we look at microfiche from the past, old newspaper articles in the public domain. We look at them with our modern eyes, our modern perspective, and see what we can learn from them. On this microfiche time capsule, we are looking at the Ladies' Home Journal from November 1901, and this article is entitled "Some Thrilling Ascents I Have Made" by Edith King Swain, who has climbed more tall structures than any other American woman. Interesting. Climbing tall structures, huh? Back then, their quote-unquote tall structures were nothing like our tall structures today. But at the same time, it is still impressive. I don't think I have climbed a tall structure. I'm not really a heights person, but so it does afford a certain amount of respect. So let's find out what kind of adventures she's been up to. From earliest childhood, my strongest ambition has been to mount every possible height and gaze down on my surroundings. I remember when I had barely learned to read that I cried bitterly after having painfully spelled out the news that the Tower of Babel was forever beyond my reach. I could just imagine a thrill-seeking child like crying that there was no Tower of Babel anymore. That's so sad. Oh gosh. After conquering all the tallest trees in the village church spire in our neighborhood, I went, one red-letter day, on an excursion to a lighthouse. A little later, on a trip to Boston, I realized one of my cherished aspirations and trudged with aching little feet up the seemingly endless spiral stairs of Bunker Hill Monument. Other long-dreamed-of ascents followed, and by the time I had climbed the Washington Monument, the Statue of Liberty enlightening the world, and about all other celebrated turrets, towers, and temples in my homeland, the habit of mounting to the top of every tall structure I came across had become confirmed, and I was eager to seek fresh fields for my favorite pastime in the Old World. I like that. That's cool that she started out looking at all of the places she could climb up to the top of in the area, got to all of them, and was like, all right, let's see what else we can find. Since then, I had visited every country in Europe and several in Africa, and have enjoyed thrilling bird's-eye views of many world-renowned places from the summits of the tallest structures they possess. I have viewed Paris from both Notre Dame and the Eiffel Tower, and Bruges I have seen from the far-famed Belfry Old and Brown of Longfellow's poem, and Venice from the sun-crowned summit of the glorious Campanile, and Naples from the wonderful astronomical tower of the monastery of San Martino, and I have dreamed over Seville from the top of the Giralda Tower, and over red-tiled Granada from the parapet of the Torre de la Vela, and crossing over to Africa, I have studied the crooked streets of Tangier from the lofty Kasbah, and blinked at the brilliant white domes of Algiers from the sacred summit of a mosque until my eyes ached. Now, I'm not familiar with all of these places, but it does sound like she's been around. That's quite a globetrotter there. Climbing the dangerous Strasbourg spire. But the most difficult and dangerous ascent I ever made was that of the cathedral spire at Strasbourg. That surprises me. I have yet to meet another of my countrywomen who has made it, and not many of my countrymen have done so. After reaching the roof of the cathedral, I waited a while to rest, and then started to resume my journey. But the way was barred by two imperturbable Germans, who were stationed in a little room through which I had to pass. They refused even to discuss such an unheard-of proceeding as the ascent of the spire by a woman. It was only after persistent argument and much pleading that they at last consented to allow me to go on, but first they insisted that I should put on a pair of large rubber overshoes to keep me from slipping. I naturally objected, and there was another argument from which I finally emerged without the overshoes. One of the men had reluctantly consented to guide me to the summit, and he now led the way over the roof to the spiral stairway running up one of the corners of the towering steeple. For some distance, although I grew dizzy from going round and round, I found the stairway perfectly safe, and I wondered at the objections made by the two Germans. But by and by the open stone grille-work became more open still, and the size of the pattern increased, the higher we went, until it would have been easy to fall through if one had been unwary, Still, there was no real danger. As we toiled higher yet, however, we began to pass great ragged gaps in the grill, where the shells of the Germans had worn away huge fragments in the War of 1870, so that at intervals the stairs were exposed for several feet to the outer side. Still, I hugged the inside wall close and was not afraid. Yeah, I'd be as surprised if she were afraid of heights. Let's be honest. Then suddenly, as I looked up after passing glance through the grill at an ever-extending view, I saw the feet of my guide disappearing around a sharp turn in the stairway. Here there was a little platform not more than 2 feet square with no grillwork on the outside. Oh gosh, like this is making me dizzy just like the description of it. Only a small wall with nothing whatever to grasp on the inside and a clear direct drop of just 400 feet down to the paved street below. Ugh! 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 Oh, that sounds horrible. Oh my gosh, this is giving me anxiety. Maybe I shouldn't have been reading this. I'm sorry, I am afraid of heights, if you can't tell. Like, I am actually, like, getting anxiety just reading about this. Gosh. People are crazy. Okay. A breathless moment in the ascent. Never in my life have I hated to do anything quite so much as I did to step up on that little stone, stand erect with nothing to hold on to, oh my gosh, and turning sharply around, reach high up to the opening through which my guide had disappeared. Yet this is what I had to do. Oh my gosh. I shall never forget how I felt inside. I held my breath, stood poised for an instant, a figure so insignificant that anyone gazing at the spire from below could not have seen me, and then, turning carefully, reached up. There was just room to turn, it seemed to me, and it was the hardest task of all, this turning my back on that awful precipice of sculptured stone. A few minutes later I was standing in the lantern, 468 feet above the earth, some 20 feet higher than the pyramid of Cheops. Ugh. I would probably throw up. Oh, gosh. I will put up some pictures here if I can find some, but that's just, oh my gosh. No, thank you. Okay. Much less hazardous than my Strasbourg ascent, but equally productive of startling sensations, have been some of my experiences in Italy. From the moment in childhood when I first read about the celebrated leaning towers at Pisa and Bologna, I had cherished an unshaken determination to climb them some day. So my first act on arriving in Pisa one sunny morning was to slip a copy of Howell's delightful Tuscan Cities into my pocket and start out for the one goal of my ambition in that vicinity, the most famous leaning tower. Dire results of an experiment at Pisa. Nothing could be more satisfactory than this tower. It leans enough to be interesting but not terrifying, and from it one can see all the local landmarks, including the cathedral with its historic swinging lamp and its familiar associations with the youthful Galileo, whose name always sends a shiver down my spine, for it was following the example of this great experimenter that involved me in the one disturbing incident of my visit to the Leaning Tower. Recalling that during his investigation into the laws of gravitation he used to drop different weights from the top of the tower, I had a fancy to do it too, and so test my ability to estimate the exact height of the structure. Unfortunately, a brilliant idea had seized me when I first thought of making the experiment. I was then in Florence, and I bought a box of small torpedoes, such as are used during the carnival, so that I could time the fall by the report. I tremble to think what might have been the consequences had I been able to find the big torpedoes like those sold in America for the 4th of July, and bought them instead of the smaller ones. Choosing a time when I was alone on the tower and no one was in sight below, I dropped a torpedo, watch in hand. At this instant a friar came hurrying around the corner, and by direst chance his shaven crown passed directly below me just in time to be struck by the falling torpedo. Oh my gosh, which exploded with appalling effect. Oh gosh, I hope he wasn't hurt. I do not know what the poor man thought, perhaps that it was the crack of doom. He was fearfully upset, and so was I. The torpedo was too small to do more than frighten him, but his amazement on looking up and seeing me peering down at him in open-mouthed horror like a gargoyle come to life was excruciatingly ludicrous. I forgot to time the report, and this ended my first and only experiment in physics. I read for an hour after to quiet my nerves before descending. Yeah, that was stupid. Like, you'd need somebody down there as well to, like, keep everybody out of the way. Ugh, jeez. So it was like a firework of some kind? I'm assuming it's not a real torpedo, but like I hope he wasn't burned. Like that, fireworks can solidly burn people. Ugh. Bologna's towers and St. Peter's Dome. The ascent of the twin towers at Bologna impressed me as much more dangerous than that of the Leaning Tower of Pisa. They were evidently intended to incline as far from the perpendicular as possible, and to enhance their startling appearance they were not only built near together, but also were so constructed as to lean at different angles. Instead, it is declared that their construction had to be stopped, as the jealous architects were so ambitious to outdo those who built the Tower of Pisa, that the center of gravity was threatened. I ascended both, after obtaining with some difficulty the special permit that is required. From Asinella, as the higher tower is called, a fine view is obtained, but from Garasenda, the shorter tower, is one that sets the pulse beating with the most feverish emotions. Its ascent is considered dangerous, and a guide willing to risk his neck in climbing it is hard to obtain. I shall never forget the creepy sensation. I was frightened, and when at length I mustered the courage to look down from the summit, I could not disabuse my mind of the impression that we were just toppling over, and in a moment more would crash down upon the arcades of the ancient Etruscan town. I was glad indeed to clamber down, and feel assured that I was in a place of safety once more. The next day I was lame, as, owing to the unusual slant of the steps, I had been obliged to bend over in a very unnatural manner. Okay, saying that you were lame is a bit of an exaggeration. It sounds like you were sore. Yeah? One other of my Italian experiences is perhaps worth mention. It was at Rome. The Eternal Cities offers so many vantage points from which to view it that it is difficult to choose any one of them. Ultimately, however, one is pretty sure to ascend St. Peter's. From the roof may be seen about all that remains of ancient Rome, and it is a sight which one is not likely ever to forget. But I could not remain content with the overlook from the roof, while the curve of the great dome still loomed far above me. So with my usual determination to reach the highest attainable point, I started with the rest. We wound up every sort of stairway, including one where the walls curved so that it was necessary to walk bent sideways. On entering the dome, we passed close to the mosaic pictures. The bits of stone were larger than one's thumbnail, and the designs, which had looked so clear and well shaded when viewed from the floor of the church, now appeared coarse. Ascending yet higher, we at last reached the little dome on the summit of the large one. Through an open window we could look directly down on the floor underneath, a sheer drop of 300 feet. A little farther on the stairs ended, but still determined to go as far as possible, I crawled up the iron ladder to the bronze ball atop of the small dome. Oh, this is giving me anxiety again. From the street, this ball appears to be about the size of an orange, but it comfortably holds 16 people. Comfortably, did I say? Not so, for it has no ventilation, and the sun heats it until it is like a fiery furnace. Yet there I had to remain for some time, awaiting my turn to descend, until I feared I would be roasted beyond recovery before I could escape from its scorching atmosphere. Despite this discomfort, however, I took solid satisfaction in the thought that I had gone to the top. But not all my ascents have been as successful in this respect as the ones I have so far chronicled. One of my deepest disappointments befell me on a certain crisp, sunny morning when I visited Gibraltar for the first time. I had often been thrilled by the thought of climbing the tower on its crest, the view from which, over 2 continents, I had heard was grand beyond imagination, and now I was actually on the ground and resolutely prepared to overcome all difficulties. But alas, there was one difficulty that no amount of inflexible determination could surmount. Even my Yankee persistence was powerless before the jealous care with which England guards the secrets of her mighty fortress rock, and preserves its summit inviolate from prying eyes. Oh, she wasn't allowed to go, yeah. Danger of using a camera at Gibraltar. I found that the regulations had not always been so strict. At one time the route to the summit was not interdicted. The pleasure parties used to ride up on mules, stopping on the way to see the vast cave which is now closed and used as an arsenal. Indeed, I was told by the inspector of shipping that only a few years before he had rambled over the rock in company with the major of artillery, and he mentioned the interesting fact that at one point the major laid hold of a little bush and tugged at it, whereupon an iron door swung back, revealing a deadly modern gun in its casemate. Yet when the door swung to, naught could be detected save sand, stones, and weeds. I was assured that the whole face of the rock is honeycombed with these masked batteries. concealed upon the broad, cool ancathus leaves, while on top is a battery of cannon with a range of 15 miles. I climbed as high as civilians are allowed to go, and gazed at the gray little town clinging like a dead vine to the steep cliff, and even caught a glimpse of the yellow Afric shore across the strait. But I could not forget the tower on top of the 1,300 feet of rock that rose far above me against the deep, cloudless blue of the southern sky. In my despair, I envied the great Barbary apes that climbed about everywhere unchallenged. I could not enter even the charming little mosque built above the town, for it had been converted into a powder house. At last I decided to derive some consolation from carefully photographing the old Moorish castle. A natty company of red-coated soldiers was drilling in the square under its walls, but as I snapped the shutter of my camera, the company suddenly grew rigid as if turned to stone, and an officer came bearing swiftly down upon me, almost speechless with indignant amazement. Did I not know that it was a serious matter to photograph anything here, that even portrait artists had to have special permissions and were kept under close surveillance? And I had snapped my camera on a body of Her Majesty's soldiers and a part of the defenses. Ah, how dare you! A unique memento of the mighty fortress. Only after profuse apologies did I preserve my camera, but finally, partly because I was an American and hence irresponsible, and partly because I was a Mormon, and partly because no sane person can possibly imagine that a spy would violate the regulations in broad view of a whole company of infantry, I was permitted to hand over my camera to the customs house officials and to reclaim it when I was leaving the town. But notwithstanding the fact that probably no other woman in the world possesses a photograph of the inside of the fortifications of Gibraltar, I still dream of that tower. I have never climbed on the crest of that great rock, and I still hope to realize two other unfulfilled aspirations of my childhood. One is to visit Egypt and climb the pyramids, and the other is to travel through India and ascend some of the mysterious dakmas or towers of silence on Malabar Hill and elsewhere around which the heaven-sent vultures ever swoop, and on which no white woman has ever stood. Wow, she's quite the adventurer, you know. It's kind of crazy to me to think of how much she's done, because like that's a lot. Yeah, that's a lot. Like she's been a lot of places, and it was literally giving me anxiety to read about some of them. Like some dangerous places. She clearly is not afraid of heights. But it's kind of like the famous mountain climbers, you know. I could picture her being a mountain climber if she had had the ability to at the time. But instead, she decided to be an urban climber, yeah. Urban explorer, kind of, and sort of, except that she just liked to climb things. But man, some of these accounts just gave me anxiety. The one about Strasbourg, that gave me some major anxiety. Like standing on a platform with no railing at all, and just like that high up, it's just like that makes me dizzy, makes me feel like I'm gonna fall, and I'm sitting down at home. You know, like I'm sitting in front of my computer, but it's just, oh wow, that's just whoa. Okay, I am glad it's not me, so this will never be me. But let me know in the comments below if there's anything adventurous that you like to do. Yeah, the most adventurous thing I ever did was move to Europe with 2 suitcases. And that's adventurous enough for me. I will keep my feet firmly on that ground. So, when I'm not in an airplane. Anyways, I hope that you enjoyed this Microfiche time capsule, and if you did, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you in the next video.